like, if you interpret it literally, like it has to do with like overthrowing the government like in a need of time. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So
I think this amendment is basically just like, I just think it's racist in general because at the time that it was made, the property that they're speaking of in the amendment is literally slaves and it's black people. So for us to like bring it into general terms now, like, yes, I guess times have changed and like property doesn't mean the same thing as it does today, but also it's our problem saying like, I don't think there's necessary for people to be walking around with guns on the street.
Have we?
wait, are we speaking of the same amendment? Because I thought it was just about bearing arms. I didn't think it had anything to do with like racial things.
I think she's saying that like it's talking about how it has you have the right to defend your property and like a like she's talking about the property being slaves, and so it is racial even though they're not blatantly speaking about like race, because yeah.
Well,
It's the Second Amendment, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's no slavery today in America, so I think it's less of an issue today. She's starting to talk about the history of the Second Amendment and the government, but.
I would like to disagree because putting people in jail is because even in the 13th Amendment, it's literally putting people into slavery. So I feel like the Constitution in general was made for the sole purpose for white people, not for people of color, and not for people that were enslaved. You feel me? So I feel like in general, I feel like that's. I disagree with you, because when you put someone into prison, you're taking away their rights, you're dehumanizing them, and you're literally just because even prisoners, they work and they don't get paid either, not all of them. So I just feel like I disagree with what you're saying.
Second Amendment, I think it's very interesting. I think that we should continue to have the right to bear arms. Look at the Second Amendment itself; it's very interesting because talk about how it's applicable today. How it's kind of changed over time, because obviously we have technology changes. And if you look at the Second Amendment very basically, your ability to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. How we interpret shall not be infringed, right? Can I go and buy a tank today? I can't, right? We can't buy tanks. So how far do we go when we say we can't infringe those rights, and just how is that kind of transition to today?
Well, when those rights, we're in a school right now, and there's been an insane number of mass shootings, and they're consistently happening, and no laws have been put in place to really prevent anything. And so when someone's amendment is directly affecting someone's right for an education, someone's right to sit here and learn like anyone else should, I really don't think that we can compare why you would need a gun back then to why you would need a gun now when people want to use these guns for violence and want to use it to take people's lives for not a good reason.
I also think in a lot of America today, guns aren't really required for protecting one's safety. If anything, I think we've moved to a point where it's there's a lot of verbal or social, there's so many other ways of protecting yourself or the cops, the NYPD is, or most police departments are way more developed than then. I don't even think there was an NYPD, and so I think restricting guns to certain groups of people might actually be a lot better.
Well, I mean, it's less of an. I mean, I'll say this and then sure. We in New York, just kind of a thing to keep in mind. We in New York City, we're fortunate to have a police force that's large and whatnot. And obviously, raise your hand. You shot a gun here? Ever held a gun? Fired a firearm? Alright, so a very small majority of this class has actually ever experienced firearms. And we don't need to. Even in the city, we're very lucky. But people in obviously Texas, that's really public state to think about that, would have different opinions, but they have more uses for firearms. They go hunting. They use. The police department aren't always right around the corner. 30, 45 minutes away. But you guys raise your hands.
Shouldn't AK-47 be used for hunting though? Shouldn't AK-47 be used for hunting?
AK-47 is another use besides hunting, self-defense. What he said.
AK-47 or
I really should walk around downtown New York City with an AK-47.
Oh wait,
I
do have something to say?
Yeah. It seems like the majority of people in here don't find the Second Amendment necessary. So my question to you guys is what would you replace it with? How would you is it amended?
Wait, did you have to see this?
Yeah, try to open up the conversation.
It's
Thinking, yeah.
Well, like, I agree with, like, what you were talking about with, like, we really, I mean, with the amount of school shootings or just mass shootings in general happening, like, I really agree that there should be more limitations on how easy it is to get guns. Like, obviously not in New York, but, like, suburban areas. Like, I think Walmart just stopped selling, like, ammunition, guns and stuff. So, like, that's really startling to, like, learn about. But also, I understand why people would be uneasy about having, like, it being illegal to own guns at all, because that means that the only people that have access to, you know, that type of, like, firepower is the military and the government. And, like, you know, that would, like, make you kind of insecure as a citizen, knowing that, like, you don't really have any way to protect yourself in case, like, something were to happen. Like,
I completely understand. And, like,
You guys have two hands back there.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say real quick, the whole point of, like, the Second Amendment was to protect yourself from the government, and, like, not from the government, but, like, just in case anything ever happened with the government. And I think it's necessary to have gun reform, not essentially take away everyone's guns, because there are people who are not, like, mentally fit to own a gun. And
You guys?
Talking about the right to bear arms, like today, I understand that not everyone lives in a city where the police force is accessible. So, my dad is Australian, and you know they also had the rights to have guns, and then you know all these mass shootings happened, and then they just took them away, and now that doesn't happen. But I want to say that if you are going to bear an arm, I think you should have extensive background checking. No, like prior, felonies, yeah, and you need to have a really good reason, not just self-defense, because you could use that. Just really big background checks, and you need to be sure that like you should sign something saying like, I'm not going to use this for other people's harm or have the best intentions.
I agree with her, and people were talking about like getting rid of the Second Amendment. I thought about like if it was the Second Amendment that was the problem, or is it like people terribly exploiting the Second Amendment that's wrong? Because like you could say the same thing about the First Amendment and free speech. Like there are people like Nazis in the country who are like saying like marginalizing groups, and that technically that's free speech, but that's also hate speech. So that's exploiting the First Amendment. The First Amendment isn't wrong. The freedom of speech is like a right that everyone has, but there are people who are exploiting that. And like if I were to, you know, think about how do we make the Second Amendment more applicable today, I would want like a federal law. Like I feel like a big thing is the inconsistencies between states and how easy it is to get guns in some and how hard it is to get in others. And like obviously there's a black market and everything, but I feel like a federal law would make things like a lot more tight.
yeah,
So, sorry, I just kind of want to go off what you said. Actually, a great time for me to change the subject a little bit in terms of the rights. First Amendment, we're going to talk about this a lot in Next Gen. And just, everyone hates Nazis, right?
Yes.
Yeah, Nazis are terrible. Should they have the right to have freedom of speech? Yes or no?
Yes.
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 Okay. So I guess kind of shift on the turn. Anyone want to disagree with that opinion? That everyone should have the right to freedom of speech?
Yes, unless it's violent.
yeah, like
No, I'm just trying to have people
dialogue.
I'm trying to have some dialogue, you know? Like, should we have like terrible people like Nazis have the right to freedom of speech? Why not?
See, I feel like, yeah, everyone hates Nazis, of course. Ideally, right? And there is really no law against hate speech. Like, you can say anything you want unless you're calling direct violence upon someone or yelling fire in a crowded building. And the thing is, because of this lack of like federal regulations of what people can and can't say, like of course like we enjoy that freedom and it's good, but like it's brought up some issues like recently with like transgender people and like pronouns and stuff like that. Like right now in our current society, especially in New York City, like which is becoming increasingly liberal. You're expected to call someone by their preferred pronoun, right? And we do that out of common, like, human decency, right? But when it comes to, like, legislation in, like, Canada, let's say, like, that there was this whole issue with, like, you know, if anyone here knows, like, Jordan Peterson and, like, him being like a college professor in Canada, and he refused to call students by their preferred pronouns because it was federal legislation that was sort of imposing this upon the people, and that was an infringement of the First Amendment. Of the First Amendment. So now we have to think about: are we doing this because the government is asking us to do this, or are we doing this because it's out of like common human decency and because we want to do this? Because Jordan Peterson, in his specific case, he would use people's preferred pronouns until the government made it mandatory. So that was a sort of really inflammatory protest that I sort of thought was interesting.
So we have time for one more comment, and then we're going to move on into like the preamble. But all this is very relevant, and it really talks about like what we're going to do at Next Gen Politics, and like it's very interesting that already like, these issues have arose, and like we're talking about them. So anyone like have like dying comment, like gotta let it out.
I think what we just have to remember is that there's a difference between free speech and things that are helpful / respectful to say. Like, free speech is a right that everyone should have. It's better to let everyone express their opinion, even if it's a hateful opinion, so that we know it's there and we know we have to deal with it. Because if it just festers underground, everything's just going to get worse. But you have to realize that you have to be responsible for your actions. So if you say something that's hateful, you have to accept that other people might think of you a different way because of that. You can't get all annoyed because someone's like, oh, you know, I feel like people at this store aren't, you know, serving me well after I said this horrible thing about this person for no reason at all. You have to accept what's going to happen when you use your right to free speech.
Yeah.
That was a
So
really good
we're going to move on. We're going to read the preamble.
Yeah, we have about 5 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to read it really, really fast.
Missed the whole debate.
Wow, you
conversation.
sound like a, you
The
know,
Second
I'm all
Amendment.
for that. I think if you had a good debate, the preamble will be there, but about 5 minutes.
And we have to memorize
I
the
just think-
preamble in middle school.
I just think it's really interesting, like how the main point of this wasn't even to go on these topics, but they are so relevant that like it became the forefront of our conversation. So within the preamble, like although they're not like explicitly talk about these, like I think that, or just like Next Gen as a whole thinks that the verbs that are used within the preamble are very important. So I'm gonna read it. We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. I'm gonna write up the verbs on the board, and then we can kind of like discuss their role in allowing the people to have certain rights and kind of like what that means and the differences between the words and how it plays out in our society. Anyone like have anything they want to say?
You missed Nisha. With an I.
And do.
Okay. We're good?
Yeah.
Rules.
Should we start with providing for marketing?
Yeah.
Alright, so we can kind of start with the idea of providing defense versus promoting general welfare and why we think those two, that word choice is like why it matters, and also like how we've seen that play out in our constitution and just everything. The idea of like the government having to provide defense but only having to promote general welfare.
So the government needs to provide like, well, protection for its people, right? But like socialist things, like socialist policies, like healthcare for all. That's not necessarily something that the government is, you know, like in their own writing. Like that's not something that the government needs to provide to the people. They're promoting like the general welfare, right? So they're not expected to, you know, ensure that every person in the U.S. is receiving like substantial healthcare and like, you know, they don't ensure the quality of life for like every person in the U.S.
terms of providing defense, there's a lot there because some of the foreign conflicts we've gotten into haven't exactly been to provide our defense and have in fact impacted our common good. So there's really the necessity to question how the government provides this defense and not just say, oh great, we're going to go on.
Any other opinions?
Move on.
We could also talk about the difference between the federal government providing and the state government providing. We'll get to that in another meeting, or what do they call these things, forums. But that the federal government, for example, over 50% of the federal government's budget is on defense, but very small. It's like 2% is on general welfare, like infrastructure, roads, etc. But for the states, for example, a majority of their budget is not defense. They obviously, states don't provide for military; they provide their own state's general welfare. So you can all think about that.
Also, I was wondering, what do you think that are some general roles that the government plays in securing the blessings of the blessings of liberty? Like, what role? How does that impact us every day?
And
just something to think about.
And how far does that extend? Blessings of liberty.
Okay. So this paper you're going to take with you, and I think it would be awesome if you could refer to it maybe throughout the civic forums because it is so relevant, and the Constitution is pretty much shapes everything we're going to talk about.
It is going to be.
Yeah. So take this with you. Take your copy of the Constitution, and we're going to go back downstairs.
Nice time.
Yeah.
What would she do? Such a power Wait, you're gonna tell me I can't wear. Actually, I should just put the entire Constitution on my shirt. How are you gonna read that? I can't read upside down. Print it upside down.
Oh, as you should. Take your posters downstairs.
I feel like they'll have a lot.
And also grab any extra papers or anything.
It's the first civic forum. We don't want to create. As long as we're the same.